Wyoming Territory, spring of 1877, the wind came down from the Bighorns sharp with snowmelt when Grace Ellery first saw the cowboy. She had not meant to stop. Her boots were soaked, her hem torn, her nerves pulled taut like fencing wire. But her lungs were burning and her legs shook from 2 days of walking. So she crouched low in the brush above the creek, clutching her satchel to her chest, and watched the man ride his horse slow along the water's edge. He was young, broad in the shoulders, hat low on his brow. Dust clung to his coat, reins loose in his hand. He hummed something low, tuneless, just loud enough that she could hear it over the creek. He had a kind face, not soft but open. He spoke to his horse like it was a friend. Grace closed her eyes and pressed her forehead against her knees. She could not afford kindness, not from a stranger. Not when Marshal Tolliver was still out there looking for her. She had run. She had stolen a horse, then lost it. She had lied to a station master, slipped off a train before the telegraph could catch up. She had done what she had to do. Because she had seen what Tolliver did to women who refused him. And now she was alone in the hills, hungry and shaking, with nothing but a satchel of sewing tools and a few dollars. Her breath caught when the cowboy dismounted. His boots crunched over the soft earth, moved toward the water. Then, without warning, he looked straight toward the brush where she hid. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I do not mean harm, but I reckon you are there." Grace's heart thudded. Her fingers clutched the leather strap of her bag so tight it creaked. "I can leave," he offered. "If that's what you need." She swallowed hard. Her voice came out dry. "Who are you?" "Name's Asa Boone. I work cattle over near the Powder River. My cabin's up that way a mile." He gestured with his head. "I got beans on the fire and a roof that does not leak." "You look like you might need both." Grace hesitated. She should run, hide, but her knees would not hold her weight. When she stood, the brush shook around her and her vision swam. Asa stepped forward only when she stumbled. He caught her elbow, firm but careful. "You are safe," he said, steady. "I promise." She let him lead her to his horse. The cabin was small but warm. Asa helped her sit by the hearth, then backed off, giving her space. He ladled stew into a tin bowl and set a clean cloth beside it. She ate slow, watching him over the rim. He moved quiet, never pressed her. Just stoked the fire and talked soft about the weather, the cattle, the shed he needed to fix. She did not tell him her name until the second day. "Grace," she said, voice low, eyes on the mended hem of her dress. "Grace Ellery." Asa nodded like he already knew. He never asked why she was out there alone. Not until the fourth evening, when she stood at the doorway watching the hills go gold in the setting sun. "You got people looking for you?" he asked. She did not turn. "Yes." He waited. "One of them wears a badge." Asa's jaw flexed, but his voice stayed calm. "You run from a Marshal." She nodded. "Did he hurt you?" His voice tightened. Grace looked down. "He tried." Asa exhaled slow. "You are not going back." She turned then, eyes wide. "I do not care what he says," Asa said. "You are here now, and you are staying safe." Grace stared at him a long moment, then gave a small nod. Her hands were shaking again, but not from fear, not this time. That night thunder rolled over the hills. Grace woke from a nightmare, breath ragged, skin cold with sweat. She heard the front door creak. Asa sat on the porch, a blanket around his shoulders, watching the storm. Grace stepped out quiet. When he looked up, she sat beside him without a word. They watched the lightning flash over the plains. "You do not flinch," she said after a while. "Storms do not scare me much. Men like him do not scare you either." "I have seen worse," Asa said, "but I do not like when folks use power to hurt." She looked down at her hands. "I lied to get away. I stole. You survived," Asa said. "That is different." She met his gaze then. "Why are you being kind to me?" Asa looked at her like it was the simplest thing in the world. "Because you need someone to be." Over the next week, Grace found her hands steadier. She mended Asa's shirts, baked cornbread, even helped stack wood. He let her work without fuss, thanked her like it mattered. She caught him watching her once, not with pity, but something else. Something warm. Her heart jumped. Then came the morning the horse returned. Grace was hanging laundry when she saw it, a dark bay with a saddle she recognized. The one she had stolen. The one she had lost. It trotted up the hill riderless. Asa stepped out, rifle in hand. His eyes met hers. "They are close," she whispered. Asa did not ask questions. He simply said, "Pack what you need." They rode out by moonlight up into the high pines. The cabin they reached was older, hidden deep in the timber. Asa said it had belonged to his uncle once. No one used it now. They stayed 2 days there. Grace barely slept. She kept expecting Tolliver to burst through the door, but he did not come. On the third morning. Asa found her by the creek, shoulders hunched. "You do not have to keep running," he said. "I do not know how to stop," she whispered. "Let me help you." Grace looked at him. "Why? Because I care about you." She blinked fast, heart pounding. Asa stepped closer. "You can stand again, Grace. You can trust again. I will be right here." She reached for him before she could think. Her hands found his shirt and his arms came around her, strong and steady. She had not cried in weeks, but she cried then, safe against his chest. And Asa held her like he had no plans of ever letting go. By the third week in the pine cabin, the snowmelt had thinned to trickles and elk tracks pressed soft into the damp soil near the edge of the clearing. Grace stood at the edge of it, her hands dusted with flour, watching a kestrel float above the canopy. She'd started baking again, flatbread mostly, sometimes with dried berries if Asa found any, and it steadied her, gave shape to the hours. Asa returned from the ridge with a bundle of firewood and a quiet expression. He didn't speak until he'd stacked it neat beside the door. "Heard a man's voice down in the ravine," he said. Far off, but it carried. Grace didn't move. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides. "Could have been a trapper," Asa added. "Could have been him. I didn't see anyone." "I should leave," she said, voice low. "You're not going alone," Asa said. She looked at him then. "You'd come with me." He didn't hesitate. "If you run, I run too." They didn't speak of it again that day. She swept the cabin floor while he oiled the hinges. That night they sat by the fire, both quiet. She traced the grain of the table with one finger while Asa carved a strip of pine for kindling, his knife glinting in the firelight. "What was your home like?" he asked, eyes still on the wood. "I don't know if I ever had one," she said. "We moved a lot. My mother sewed for families in Kansas City. We never stayed long. You like sewing. I like making things whole again," she said. "Even if it's just thread and cloth." The fire popped, and Asa looked at her for a long while before speaking. "You ever think of staying in one place? I wouldn't know how. I could teach you." She met his gaze. There was no jest in it, only quiet certainty. She looked away first, but her lips pressed tighter than before, like she was holding something in that might come loose if she let it. The next morning, she found Asa outside, sleeves rolled, fixing the doorframe with a wedge of split cedar. She watched him a moment before stepping forward. "What do you do when you're not chasing cattle?" she asked. "Fix what breaks," he said without looking up. "Keep fences up, keep the land from swallowing the barn." "That sounds tiring." "It is, but you sleep good after." She smiled with only half her mouth. "Maybe I could help." He turned then, hammer paused in his hand. "You want to?" "I want to try." By afternoon, her palms were sore from carrying rocks to shore up the base of the shed. Asa didn't hover. He worked beside her, steady and wordless, passing tools when needed. At one point, she stood back and watched him lift a beam into place, his shirt damp at the collar, his brow furrowed in thought. "You always this quiet when you work?" she asked. "Mama used to say talking too much while hammering makes the nails go crooked." She laughed then, hand pressed lightly to her side. "She sounds like a smart woman." She was. Grace's smile faded slow. "Is she gone?" "3 winters back," Asa said. "Buried her on a hill she liked." She used to sit there and say the wind reminded her of Missouri. Grace nodded, not asking more that night. A storm rolled in low and heavy, but not with lightning. Just rain steady soaking. They sat inside, lantern glowing low, the air thick with the smell of pine pitch and damp wool. Asa poured coffee into 2 tin cups and set one in front of her. "You ever shoot?" She blinked at him. "A rifle? Anything." She hesitated, then shook her head. "No one ever taught me." "You want to learn?" She didn't answer right away. "Would it matter?" "He's a lawman." "Law or not," Asa said. "He bleeds like anyone else." She gripped the cup tighter. "I don't want to kill him." "I'd never ask you to." Grace looked down at the coffee, then back at him. "You mean to protect me even if it costs you?" He didn't blink. "Yes." She stared at him so long the fire sank low behind her, casting more shadow than light. "What if I don't know how to be safe?" she said softly. "I'll wait until you do." She stood suddenly, stepped closer, and before her courage faltered, reached out and placed one hand on his chest. His heartbeat was steady beneath her fingers. He didn't move. "I don't want to run anymore," she said. Asa's voice was rougher than before. "Then we don't." She leaned in slow. He met her halfway. The kiss was quiet, no rush in it, just the soft press of mouths and the warmth of breath shared between them. When she pulled back, she rested her forehead against his. "I'm still scared." "So am I," he whispered, but neither of them stepped away. The snow had gone from the ridges, and the creek ran louder now, rushing wild through the valleys. Grace stood barefoot on the flat stone near the edge, skirt lifted above her ankles, the water swirling cold and fast around her toes. She was mending Asa's flannel on the porch earlier when the sound of the creek called her down like it had when she was a child. Back then, she'd only had one place that felt like hers, a narrow bend in the Kansas River where cottonwoods leaned heavy over the water. That place was gone now, but the light off the water here felt the same. "Should I be worried you're about to vanish into the woods again?" Asa's voice came from behind her, closer than she expected. She turned her head slightly. "I thought you'd be up at the ridge still." "Was. Saw you walking down and figured you might need company." "You always follow women into the woods." "No," he said, "just the one." She looked at him then, really looked. His hair was still damp from the sweat of his climb, his shirt clung to his collarbone. He looked out over the water a moment before sitting on the rock beside her, boots still on, arms resting on his knees. "I found a trail that wasn't there last week," he said. "Cutting north through the pines, fresh tracks, mule hoof, not a horse." She didn't ask what that meant. She didn't have to. "I think it's time we move again," he added. "There's an old cattle line shack 2 valleys over. Roof's bad, but we can patch it." Grace turned her head toward the sunlight. "We keep going like this. You think it ever ends?" He didn't answer right away. "It ends when you say it does. I don't know what I'd do if I wasn't running, what kind of life that'd be." "You'd plant something, probably," he said. "Fix a porch railing, make more of those flatbreads you pretend you don't enjoy baking." She laughed, soft and surprised. "You think that's a life worth having?" "I do." They sat in silence then, the kind that didn't need filling. Grace let the water numb her feet until the ache in her legs quieted. Asa picked up a small stone and turned it over in his palm, thumb brushing the smooth edges. "I used to think I'd never stay in one place again," he said after a while. "After the war, I drifted cattle to New Mexico, worked fence crews in Utah, never unpacked more than a bedroll. What changed? I got tired of leaving things behind." Grace crouched to rinse her hands, then stood. "I don't want to leave anymore either." Asa rose beside her. "Then let's stay, not here too close but somewhere we choose, not because we're chased." She nodded, slow, like the idea was still taking shape in her mind. That night she asked him to teach her how to shoot. They used the small clearing behind the cabin. Asa set a tin can against a stump and handed her the rifle, the same one he'd carried down from the ridge. It was heavier than she expected, the wood worn smooth where his hands had held it. "Hold it firm here," he said, adjusting her grip. "Don't let it pull you." Grace squared her shoulders. "What if I miss?" "You will." She glanced at him. "At first," he added, "but you'll hit it when it matters." The first shot rang out sharp, echoing against the tree line. The can didn't move. She exhaled through her teeth. "Again," Asa said. She fired twice more, shoulders jerking slightly with each recoil. On the fourth shot, the can tipped and fell. She lowered the rifle, blinking against the smoke. Asa grinned. "Told you." She didn't smile back right away, just stared at the stump. Then, slowly, she handed him the rifle. "I want to learn how to clean it next," he nodded. "Tomorrow, I'll show you." Later, as she folded the small wool blanket over her cot, Asa paused by the door. "You should take the bed tonight." Grace looked up. "It's your bed. You need rest more than I do." She hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll be fine on the floor." She stepped toward him, stopping just short of touching. "You don't have to do that." He looked at her, something quiet in his gaze. "I know." She reached out, fingers brushing his sleeve. "You could stay." "Just to sleep." He didn't move for a moment. Then he set his hat on the peg and nodded once. They lay beside each other, not touching, just breathing into the stillness. After a time, her hand found his beneath the blanket, fingers curling around his. He didn't speak, just held on. They left the pine cabin at dawn, carrying little, just what they could strap to Asa's pack mule and tuck inside Grace's stitched canvas satchel. She'd sewn it herself the day before, with scraps of ticking cloth they'd found inside a forgotten trunk. Asa said it'd hold better than leather in wet weather. She believed him. The new shack lay to the west, along a narrow trail that sloped between granite outcrops and small stands of juniper. The mule walked slow but steady. Grace didn't mind. The quiet let her notice things. Owl feathers caught in brambles, the distant call of a sandhill crane, the way Asa's hand sometimes brushed hers when the trail narrowed. By midday, clouds moved over the sun and the air cooled. They stopped near a bend where a spring trickled from the rocks. Asa filled their canteens while Grace knelt and ran her fingers through the moss. "I don't understand how it can be so peaceful here," she said, not looking up. He passed her a canteen. "Some places don't carry the echo of men." She took a drink. "Maybe that's what I need." His voice was quiet. "You're not the only one." They reached the shack just before dusk. It leaned slightly east with a broken shutter and moss thick along its low eaves. But the walls held firm and the roof, though patched with bark in places, kept out the wind. A rusted stove squatted in one corner, its stovepipe still intact. Asa stepped inside first, lifting a board off the floor to check for rot. "We'll need to sleep close to the hearth." "Floor's soundest there." Grace unrolled the blanket they'd shared and began sweeping the stone hearth with a pine bough. "You think anyone's been here since your cattle days?" "Maybe a rider caught in snow," he said, "but no one stayed." "There's dust in the corners and bird droppings on the sill." She wiped one of the windows clean with the edge of her sleeve. "I like that it's crooked." He looked up. "Why? Doesn't pretend to be perfect." That night they didn't light the stove. The air was cool but not cold, and the fire might draw eyes. Instead, they ate cold beans and hard bread on the floor, backs to the wall. Asa ran his finger along the edge of the tin plate. "My uncle had a saying, said folks don't grow strong in comfort. Said it takes weather and work." Grace stared at the light fading through the cracked shutter. "I think I've had enough weather." He set his plate aside. "Then maybe it's time for the work." She pulled her knees up. "You think I can build something again?" "Something real." Asa leaned back on his elbows. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't." The words settled between them, soft and certain. A few days passed. They worked in rhythm without needing much talk. Asa reforged the bent hinges on the door using an old file and the heat from a small, covered fire. Grace patched the roof with strips from an oilcloth, climbed up herself when Asa's legs started aching. He didn't argue. One morning she found him standing at the edge of the clearing, staring west through the trees. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't turn. "There's a creek a half day from here, flat land nearby, good soil." She stepped to his side. "You think we could grow something there?" "I think we could live there." Grace watched the wind bend the grasses. "He'll keep coming, I know. I don't want to wait for him anymore." Asa glanced at her. "Then we don't." He brought her to town that week quietly, by back trails and with care. They stopped at a marshal's office in a dusty crossroads settlement near the Powder River. Not Tolliver's jurisdiction. A different man kept the law here. Grace waited outside, hands clenched in her lap, while Asa stepped in alone. When he returned, his face was unreadable. "He said Tolliver lost his badge," Asa said. "Too many complaints, too many questions." Grace didn't speak. "He's not hunting you anymore." She blinked once, then again. "You're sure?" Asa nodded. "I saw the letter myself." Her knees gave out before she meant them to, and he caught her, one hand braced around her waist. Back at the shack, she didn't say anything for a long while. Just sat on the ground, watching the sky shift behind the trees. Then softly, "I don't know what to do with peace." Asa sat beside her, pulling his hat low. "We'll learn together." She turned to him, eyes clear, voice steady. "I want to stay, not just here, I want a home with you." He didn't smile. He just reached over, took her hand, and said, "Then we'll build one." And she believed him. They planted in early June. Asa turned the earth with a rusted plow pulled by the mule, and Grace followed behind with seed sacks tied at her waist. The soil near the creek ran dark and soft, And when the first corn shoots broke through, she pressed her palms into the dirt beside them and whispered nothing, just breathed. Asa built a fence along the north edge while Grace laid out rows for beans and squash. She'd never known how to look ahead before, never planted something with the expectation she'd still be around to see it grow. But each morning now, she woke with the sound of birds in the cottonwoods and the weight of his arm resting beside her, and the world felt steadier under her feet. One clear afternoon, while Asa was mending the wagon shaft under the lean-to, she opened the cedar chest he'd brought down from the first cabin. Inside, wrapped in a wool runner, was a small wooden box with dovetailed corners. "What's this?" she asked, holding it up as he ducked inside for water. He wiped his hands on his shirt. "That was my mother's. She kept letters in there." Grace sat down on the stoop. "You don't read them? They're not mine to read." She ran her thumb along the edge of the lid. "You ever think about what she'd say about this place?" "I think she'd say I finally stopped running." Grace watched him for a long moment. "And me," he set the tin cup beside her. "She'd have liked you. They didn't speak much that night." But as the moon rose, Asa reached across the bedroll and brushed a piece of hair from her temple. She turned to him, eyes soft but sure. "I never had plans," she said, "before this. You don't have to have them now. I want them," she said quietly. "I want a life that's mine." "With you?" Asa didn't answer with words. His hand found hers beneath the blanket, and he held it there, slow and warm, until sleep pulled them both under. By midsummer, the cabin was no longer just a shelter. Grace had sewn curtains from flour sacks, and Asa had built her a small shelf by the hearth to keep her thread and needles in order. They found a milk cow at her ranch 2 valleys south, a freckled thing with a crooked horn and a steady temperament. Grace named her Clover. One morning she found Asa sitting by the creek with a sheet of paper folded twice in his hand. He passed it to her without speaking. It was an official notice, signed by the new Marshal out of Cheyenne. Tolliver had been found dead outside Green River Station. A knife wound, no suspect named. Grace read it twice, then folded it and set it in the fire. Asa watched the edges curl. "You feel anything?" "Relief," she said, "and nothing else." He nodded once. "Then we don't speak his name again." They didn't. That fall, the trees turned slow. Aspen leaves drifted onto the roof, and Grace canned squash in clean jars Asa traded for in town. They built another fence, this one around a small clearing where she planned to plant a peach tree come spring. He carved her a bench from juniper wood and set it under the cottonwood she liked to read beside. One evening, after supper, Asa lit the lantern and brought out a small leather pouch. He opened it slow, revealing 2 silver bands, simple, unpolished but solid. "I traded the saddle I brought down from the old place," he said. "Didn't figure I'd need it again." Grace blinked once, then took the ring he offered. "You sure?" she asked. He reached for her hand. "Yes." They stood outside under the stars, no preacher, no vows. Just her hand in his and the wind moving soft through the grass. He slipped the ring onto her finger and she did the same. "You reckon this makes us married?" she asked. "I reckon it does." She leaned into him, cheek to his chest. "Then we're home." Years passed, one by one. The peach tree flowered the 3rd spring, and the bench beneath it grew smooth with use. They added a room onto the cabin when Grace's belly swelled round and full. Their daughter was born in late April, her hair dark as Asa's, her hands small but restless. They named her Clara, after the river Grace had once watched from the edge of a Kansas field, long before she knew what it meant to be still. Asa built her a cradle from pine and lined it with flannel Grace stitched herself. In the evenings, they sat by the hearth, Clara sleeping pressed between them, and Grace would read aloud from the worn book of Psalms she'd carried across 3 states. Asa listened with one arm around her shoulders, his other hand resting on their daughter's back. There were no more messages from town, no shadows in the trees, just the creek, the garden, and the slow rhythm of days that belonged entirely to them. One quiet autumn, Clara toddled out into the yard, her hands full of dried leaves, and Grace called after her, laughing beneath the sky. Asa looked at her, then at the woman who had once stepped out of the brush with a torn hem and a fire in her eyes, and he saw not the girl who'd fled, but the woman who had chosen to stay. And Grace, watching him from the porch, knew without question that she had not only survived but built something whole. Together, they grew old in that place. Not marked by the things they'd run from, but by everything they'd grown: a home, a family, a love quiet and unshakable as the land beneath their feet.